The Long Road to Peace in Ukraine. This is episode 79 of En Route. Hello and welcome to En Route, the podcast at the intersection of church and Maine. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. It's been a while, a few weeks, a little bit longer than usual for between episodes. Been busy actually putting together this episode, and I'm hopefully putting together the final touches of something that will be both a podcast and hopefully video. That will be dealing with a religious aspect on the war in Ukraine. So just kind of a little heads up, but that's kind of why things were taking so long, and also trying to find guests for the podcast. Some people was hoping to look for didn't pan out, but we do have someone today, and the person that we will be talking to today is someone that I've known for nearly 30 years. Dan Buttry is an American Baptist minister, and he has worked in peacemaking efforts for several decades. In 2020, he retired from his role as the global consultant for peace and justice for the International Ministries of the American Baptist churches. His peacemaking efforts has basically had him travel the world, working with Baptists, other Christian groups, other faiths, training people in conflict transformation, and also working with grassroots communities, and as well as educational institutions. He's also taken part in various mediations of various conflicts around the world, including places such as Myanmar, Burma, and India. So in this episode, I talked to Dan about his experiences in Ukraine. This is a place that he, along with his wife, Sharon, who is also a peacemaker in her own right, that they've visited many, many times. And so he has worked with a number of people that are involved in peacemaking efforts around Ukraine. And we talk about those journeys, what he has learned, and how that relates to the current Russian invasion of Ukraine. So let's give a listen to Dan Buttry. Well, Dan, it's good to hear from you. It's been a while since we've talked. And so I'm glad that we have this chance to kind of talk about this very important issue. So,
my entry into Ukraine actually comes from a person named Fyodor Raychinets. Mm-hmm. Fyodor was he was a student of Miroslav Volf. I don't know if that name rings any bells. Yeah. His book Exclusion and Embrace is one of the best theological books I've ever read ever. But Fyodor had become a Ukrainian Baptist missionary to Bosnia. And he had heard about me through some common friends, and he asked me to come to Bosnia twice. I came and worked with him, and we had some amazing experiences, a lot of it dealing with the post-war situation and the trauma and the divisions that people had. And so Fyodor has this real heart for peacemaking and reconciliation. He's also got a very both ecumenical and interfaith perspective. One of his best friends was the local Muslim imam, and we met him. So Fyodor then went to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian Evangelical Theological Seminary, which is located just outside Kiev, and it is basically kind of Baptist and Pentecostal folks, and he was the dean for what I forget what they call it exactly, but it's kind of a distance learning program where students they taught in Russian, so they had students from across the former Soviet Union, and including Russia, and they would come twice a year to the seminary for intensive 2-week times, and then they'd go back and have other stuff that would be going on in their home context. And so Fyodor is overseeing all of that, and he invited me to come. Every other year, I would teach a 1-week intensive class on conflict transformation. And I mean, it was morning, afternoon, and just the whole very intense time. So I think I did 5 of those, the last one being in 2019. And then one of the students early on was a woman named Veronika Voloshyna. Veronika was both a student, but she also helped translate the class that I was teaching, because she was such a good translator between English, Russian, and Ukrainian. And so we got to know each other a little bit more because working as translator. But then she ended up coming. I went to Ukraine for a special 10-day training in conflict transformation trainers. We call it TCTT. I call it the grad school of the University of the Streets, because we teach everything from getting to win-win solutions, mediation, dealing with diversity. Mainstream margin is kind of the terminology we use. Experiential education, power dynamics, nonviolent struggle, trauma and trauma transformation and reconciliation, and the spirituality dealing with all those things kind of woven through it. It's 10 days, very intense. And Veronika was there. We did it at the seminary, and we had some other folks from Ukraine, but we also had people from Middle East, Africa. I co-facilitated with an African, a Zimbabwean friend who kind of I've mentored over the years, Lancelot Mateo, Lance. And so we had a great time. Out of that, Veronika, she became one of our superstars, and she lives in the city of Dnipro, which is in eastern Ukraine. And in eastern Ukraine, there's kind of like I don't know how this is going to look right in terms of, but this is east over here. Mm-hmm. Eastern Ukraine has this kind of crescent of provinces that have been involved in the war there, and Russia supporting it, and Russian volunteers fighting along with the Russian ethnic folks in Ukraine. And Dnipro is like right here. It's not in the war zone, but it's in the it's the place very, very close to it. And Veronika was doing mediation work, but she very involved in the community, and she brought together people from the war zone to do workshops, trauma healing, and other kinds of things related to that. And that's a whole long story, but we did that twice, and then later Sharon came with me, and we did it a third time in Dnipro with Veronika and Sharon and I leading, and we did a whole bunch of different things. But Veronika also then, and in 2019, Veronika and Sharon and I went to back to Kiev, and did training with one of our 10-day training graduates in Kiev with all kinds of Christian folks. I shouldn't say Christian, Protestant Christian folks. Mm-hmm. We might have had a few other folks in there in the mix, but it was just really great stuff. And so our last time there was in November 2019, just before COVID hit. But also, we retired. I had been serving as a global missionary with International Ministries of American mm-hmm. Baptist Churches, and so doing peace work around the world. And Ukraine was one of the places. I also did peace work a lot in various parts of Africa, particularly Kenya and Ethiopia and Liberia, quite a bit in the Middle East, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, and then also in Asia, mostly in Northeast India, Myanmar, Thailand, Philippines. So those have been most of my areas, and then a little bit elsewhere. But so Ukraine, and Republic of Georgia, which is very similar, former Soviet republic that Russia has invaded twice, and so anyway, that was the context. So these two people have especially been close to me. Fyodor also took me to, because they were working in all the former Soviet republics and had students coming in, the seminary established programs in some of those places, particularly Kyrgyzstan, and then later Tajikistan. And so Fyodor took me along with him to do programming training in those two Central Asian countries, so that was the context. So now what's going on? It's just been heartbreaking. Dnipro. First, a couple about Veronica. She also became felt a call to pastoral ministry, and women in ministry are not very respected, and there's very little place for them in Ukrainian churches of any kind, Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant. She's kind of Pentecostal background, and so she started this house church, and after one of the trainings, she wanted to have an ordination service. So I came prepared to do the ordination for her, and she had two male mentors who also participated, which was really cool to have Ukrainian men participate in ordinating this woman. And we had a man come from the war zone for the training that we were in, and he just loved it. And when he found out we were doing an ordination for Veronica, he asked if he could join. So it was cool that we had 3 Ukrainian male ministers who participated in ordaining her. I thought that's pretty radical. And very close ties to her. Well, she lives alone in one of those high-rise buildings that you've seen that have been getting, bombed and shelled and all that. And she decided that she wanted to, she left to move in with her parents, who are in a more, kind of small town, rural kind of setting outside of Dnipro. But then just a few days ago, she decided that she wanted to leave. She has a son in the Netherlands, and she just felt like it was a difficult decision. And she's now made it, I think last I had confirmed from her, was a city in Western Ukraine near Lviv. And I've been to Lviv once for the Eastern European Baptist Federation meetings there. But so she's trying to get out, and we're in contact almost every day. Fyodor, meanwhile, the seminary is on one of the main routes where Russians have been advancing, and some of the neighborhoods where faculty and staff live have become the combat zones, where the frontline fighting is taking place. The seminary evacuated almost everybody, but they have this small crew. I don't want to say skeleton crew because, just right now that's not a good word.
Yeah, not the best choice of words. Yeah.
So, but it's includes the kitchen staff, who all decided they wanted to stay and feed people. And so they're feeding both some of the people in the Ukrainian resistance, but also, old people, children. They even go out into the community and find where people are. And Fyodor lost his wife to COVID about a year ago. And so he's got 2 adult children. Fyodor decided to stay and not evacuate, and saw that every day the seminary is sending out these kind of updates to the people that are in their newsletter network. And and people can send donations. But Fyodor, there's this beautiful picture you might have seen of Fyodor giving food to this elderly woman, And so here's this professor of theology out sharing the love of Jesus amid a war zone. And I just deeply moved by Fyodor. But that's who I've come to know him as. I'm not surprised by him doing that. He is a super heady, egghead theologian kind of person, but he practices it. He's got the walk to go with the talk. So,
I was looking just as we were getting ready to record. It was just an old, I think it was an old journal that you had written for International Ministries for the American Baptists, and it was about a recent this was in 2017 of a trip.
Yes.
And it was interesting. You were talking that there was a woman there. I hope I get the name right. Is Elena?
Yes.
And that she had you had all done this kind of interesting skit.
Yes.
That you kind of talked about silence and screaming.
Yes.
And you talked about how the Holy Spirit moved in that experience. Would you mind sharing that? Because I think it's
so Elena is from Donetsk, which was the center of the war in eastern Ukraine, and so it was 2 years at the time, and it's still going on, the fighting constantly. And she'd lived for 2 years with artillery shells going off all the time. And so one of the main stories we've worked with in our training for trauma is from 2 Samuel chapter 21, the story of Rizpah, which is one of those stories that, I had never, as a Bible major and as a seminary grad, never even noticed it. It was one of those awful stories. This is some gag, this is an awful story. It's about David killing 7 of the sons of Saul. And Rizpah has this vigil, just a couple verses about her, keeping away the animals and the birds and all this kind of stuff from the bodies of her children. And at first we used it for a story about raising the voice from the margins, because she was ultimate margin in so many ways. And she took this nonviolent action. But later, when Sharon and I studied trauma, we noticed there's all the responses to trauma there. This other mother lost 5 sons, and she just disappears from the story. Like so many people who are victims in a war like this, or, whatever going on in our society, people who are victimized, and they just kind of clam up and hold their pain inside themselves and get stuck. And so we got that example. Then we got the Gibeonites, who were an ethnic minority group who Saul had massacred many of them. Basically, we'd call it genocide or ethnic cleansing, that was going on in Israel. And God becomes the only advocate for the Gibeonites, bringing famine upon Israel, saying, hey, you did this terrible thing and nothing has been done to set it right. No justice has been done. Well, the Gibeonites, God becomes the advocate, but the Gibeonites want to do something else. They want to kill the sons of Saul. And God's not telling about that at all. It's kind of God's silent as David, he says, oh, that's fine with me. And so they're an example of somebody who was traumatized and takes their trauma and commits violence and against the perpetrator, and so you have this cycle of violence going on and on. And then there's Rizpah, who acts in a transformative way, and this vigil, and what's fascinating, the more you dig into the text, is that David is transformed by Rizpah's action, because he goes and gets the bones of Saul and the other sons of Saul who had been killed at the Battle of Mount Gilboa, brings them to Rizpah, to the woman whose children he had killed. Those bones had never been properly buried, and to me that was an act of public repentance on the part of David, saying, and he was trying to do some restitution. He couldn't bring back the dead, but he could honor the dead and restore honor to the family that he had dishonored, and they together bury the bones. And what's fascinating is that act created reconciliation between the house of Saul and the house of David, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And later, after David died, Solomon's king, after Solomon dies, there's civil war in Israel, and only one tribe stayed with the tribe of Judah, David's tribe, and that was Benjamin, Saul's tribe. So here's this multi-generational reconciliation and healing that happens. At the center of it is this horrible story in the middle of trauma of this marginalized, traumatized woman. So in the workshops, what we do is we have people read the Bible text with some questions, because just kind of pause, dig into it, because we never dig into this text. It's so awful. Dig into it, get to the feelings, and then we interview somebody as the Merab, who's the first mother, and give voice to her feelings. And then we interview Mr. or Ms. Gibeon, and then we enact the whole story. And I'm usually the narrator and David, playing both those roles. And I need somebody to be Rizpah. When Sharon's with me, she usually plays Rizpah. She's an amazing Rizpah. But I didn't have her there at this time. So I asked for a volunteer, and we had a break. So she came with me. Olena came up to me, and she volunteered to do it. And I told her the whole thing, and she agreed. She agreed to all of it. And so she's sitting with the group as we start the story, and I talk about David, the famine, God praying, and God saying there's this genocide that you haven't dealt with. And so then I go to the person who I'd interviewed as the Gibeonite person, and then we go get 7 sons of Saul, who are, we just grab people in the group, line them up on these 7 chairs, and then we slaughter them, praise God, and go back. And then we kind of wait. And the woman playing Rizpah, Olena in this case, she gets up from the group, and she's like this tightly wound spring in her body language. And just she moves toward them with this incredible tenseness. And then out of her erupts the most incredible scream I've ever heard. She just screamed and screamed and screamed, and goes to the dead bodies of her children, and then we have the whole thing of her, keeping the animals away, and then David hearing about it, and bringing the bones of Saul and being rescued, or coming together to bury all the bones together, and then God healing the land after that reconciliation. But that scream from Olena, and when we did the kind of the debrief from the group, it was like that was the moment for everybody. They just talked about that was the most riveting moment, was when she screamed. And she came to me afterward and she said, "Thank you. That was the work I needed to do." She said, "For 2 years, I've been just bottling up all the horror, trying to survive from one day to the next, with this artillery going on, explosions all around us." And she said, "I just needed to let that out. And I feel so much better. Thank you. I needed that." And she was kind of the one that kind of did that on behalf of everybody who participated, experienced it in a cathartic way. And I think that's one of the things that is going on right now, is that, how people living in trauma, I've seen some stories from Ukraine. This family of 4 that were trying to evacuate. They were in a car caravan, and some of the family were in other cars, but this father and his mother-in-law, grandmother of the 2 kids, one of them 10 months old. And the Russians at the checkpoint just opened fire, killed them all. And, and it's like the horror and the rage, that comes. And at the Bruce Cockburn concert, he did this song, "If I Had a Rocket Launcher," out of his experiences in Central America. And I think any war zone you go to, when you see what happens to people, right now, what's happening in Ethiopia, what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Yemen, and then all kinds of things, and we've got, of course, our own histories here, between slavery and contemporary racism and what happened to the indigenous peoples in the Americas. We've got our hands full of these historic horrors and traumas that carry on, and that we still live out. Sharon and I did some work with Menachem Resman's book about. Do you know that? My Grandmother's Hands. You would love that.
Yes, I have heard
yeah.
of that.
Oh, and he'd worked with the Minneapolis police at one time, But he talks about black bodies, white bodies, and blue bodies, and the way that trauma gets into us, and how the trauma working its way out. He's African American and trying to, but it was interesting because he talked about how many times, as we had that whole thing of the Gibeonites being the traumatized people, and they take it out on the oppressor, the sons of Saul, and how white Europeans went through horrific trauma in Europe, and then they came and displaced that onto African bodies, and African bodies took on all the garbage, if you will, if I'm trying to tone it down, all the trauma there. And just that we often, and when we're traumatized, and if we don't deal with it in a healthy way, we can internalize it against ourselves, or we can, then displace it against somebody else, the kick the dog syndrome. I'm powerless to do anything. So I, abuse in the family or kick the dog. But so here I am, a white guy, European, English, Scottish descent, proud that I got this family tree. And after reading Menachem, I went back and looked at my family tree, and I found this guy in England who was in my family tree, who was involved in a political thing, and he was drawn and quartered, which means that they took, tied ropes to his ankles and his wrists, put horses on each end that rode in opposite directions, just ripping his body apart. And I thought, there's my, some of the horrors in my European history. And then we come to the U.S., to the Americas, and what do we do? How do we act out that displacing it on others? I think in Ukraine right now we're seeing Russians who had this superpower, the Soviet Union, and then it disintegrated, and they lost so much, and they, their country broke up into Ukraine and Russia and Belarus and Georgia and the Baltic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so this kind of shame and humiliation. And I think that's what's driving Putin a lot, is this, trying to get it, get back that pride. And of course, they're doing it in such a horrific way, And they're not making the Ukrainians love them.
No. I think one of the things that, though, has been fascinating, and you've probably seen these stories too, and pictures. Probably the most famous so far is a picture of a young Russian soldier borrowing a phone and being given tea to drink.
Yes.
He's calling his mom back in Russia, and these Ukrainians are giving him tea, and it's kind of a fascinating photo to see in the midst of all of this.
Yes.
This kind of act of reconciliation. But do you see that kind of replicating itself? Does it have an effect? And as this, crisis still continues, how much more challenging is it going to be to do things like that?
Yes. Oh, that's a great question. And Ukraine has a lot of people, over 1 million people, who are veterans of nonviolent struggle. There was an Orange Revolution, they called it, that overthrew a Russian-leaning president. People say, no, we want to be... And I forget what year that was, maybe 2013, something like that.
Well, there was 2004 or 5 was the Orange Revolution.
Okay.
And then the Maidan was 2014.
Maidan. So Maidan took about 3 months. And there's a wonderful Netflix documentary on it called Winter on Fire, or Winter of Fire, Winter on Fire. And Netflix just recently made it available for free on YouTube as a part of their connecting to the struggle. It's an incredible documentary. I had taught just a few months before Maidan. I'd teaching at the seminary, and so all these seminary students are now Facebook friends, and I was getting messages from them from Maidan saying they're shooting at us, because the government, which was a Russian-controlled, Russian-leaning president that had was backing off of some agreements they thought were going to go tying to Europe. That's what ignited Maidan, and the government stationed snipers on the rooftops of government buildings and started shooting down into this crowd, and all kinds of things went on. And it wasn't a pure nonviolent revolution, because some of the people took, Molotov cocktails and garbage cans for lids as shields, and, rocks and, all kinds of stuff. But they eventually, brought down the government. The guy fled to Moscow, buddy of Putin. And immediately after that is when Putin seized the Crimea. And then later, the eastern Ukraine. So the Maidan was, I think, the point of the struggle, which said, we are Ukrainians, we're not Russians. Now, part of their story is under Stalin, 3 million Ukrainians had died in famine. That was not, it was a state-organized famine, and part of it was to strengthen Russian control ethnically, and that happened a lot under Stalin. So they remember that, but they also feel this connection to Russia, and a lot of Ukrainians spoke more Russian than they did Ukrainian, and so there's this deep, broad, experiential base, and I think that's showed up some already, and sometimes very strong. There was a kind, gracious thing in the sharing the phone and tea. There was also the woman who was videoed putting sunflower seeds in soldiers, saying, when you die, I want a flower to grow up at least. But it's nonviolent. And already I heard just today in one of the cities, the few cities that Russia has taken control of, there's protests going on already.
Yes, I've seen those pictures.
Yes, amazing.
And that's just amazing.
Amazing. And the connection where they're trying not to demonize Russians. So even Zelensky has been speaking directly to Russian people, and of course they're getting their own media that Putin controls and so on. But some of these links that are coming in, one of the things that's really rough for ordinary people is that, and this is what Russia's doing now, is that they're not fighting a military battle. They're instead using bombardment and missiles and air attacks to just destroy everything. And it's easy to do because there's a distance between the person who's launching that artillery shell or firing off the missile and the people that are hurt. When the soldiers get into the communities, they're seeing the people, and so there's a face. There's that old woman. Do I shoot an old woman that's like my grandmother? And so it becomes a humanized kind of thing, and so a part of the leadership level is separate as much of the violence from close encounters as possible, because that allows the killing to be done without the conscience being stirred. And so we're seeing that happen right now. So right now it's really, really tough. But there's also the thing, kind of the sense in which I think peacemakers need to have a mindset a lot like soccer players, or as in Ukraine they would call it football. And in soccer, you don't kick the ball to where the person is. You kick the ball to where they're going to be. And so as peacemakers, if we completely get, today's news, and, I'm doing it like everybody else, just looking at today's news, what happened. But peacemakers need to also be thinking, down the line, where are things going to be? And some of that is, happening now, and how to stand with the grandmothers and the people in occupied areas now, with the soldiers, interacting with them in humane ways. How to connect with Russians who are protesting in Russia. But one of the things Jesus in his Sermon on the Mount talked about, gave 3 examples of turning the other cheek, giving the cloak, and going the second mile, which we, in our training, we unpack that a lot. And a lot of it is in these face-to-face encounters with an oppressor of one kind or the other. And in all of them, Jesus is calling people to claim your own humanity. I'm not a victim. I'm a human being, and I'm not going to play the role of the victim. And so how can we then do that, but in a way that doesn't take away the humanity of the other? So hearing that story about and seeing it, the cup of tea shared with the Russian soldier, I heard a TED talk by a U.S. veteran from Iraq who was in this, he was kind of the commander for this small group, it's like platoon commander or something like that. But they were supposed to sweep this area for guns, and they just went into this house and they just tore it to pieces looking for weapons. And the guy served them tea, the homeowner. And it's like he wasn't transformed in that moment, but he was haunted by it. And he realized all of a sudden, who's the one wrong here? We're demonizing that other guy, but I'm destroying his house, even as he serves me tea. And it changed the narrative in his mind that he had got from, the U.S. media, U.S. government, his military training and all that, but it's the human interaction. And he's now, been involved in all kinds of transformative things. But it was the cup of tea that changed it all for him. So who knows what will happen to that Russian soldier, and others. And we sometimes think it's got to be an immediate response, but it can sometimes, profound change can take a while,
It's like planting a seed.
Yes. So anyway, all those kind of things are, boiling in me, and I just pray for my Ukrainian friends but I also pray for my Russian friends. One of my students, Sharon, and I had a wonderful time with this student who's from Moscow in 2019, and she does work with women who have been cast off socially for whatever reason. Some of them battered women. Some of them have been in the sex trades, just all kinds of things. And she works, her ministry's been with these women doing amazing work. And, I'm thinking, Russia, this sister's there, she's one of them. And, I can't demonize them all because she's part of that. And we have a friend who is a church planter in St. Petersburg, and she and her family have had to flee. But she's just heartbroken because she knows so many Russians and loves them. but sees this, horrific stuff going on. And so I think, it's really important for us not to demonize the other. And one of the things, Bruce Coburn, we just saw him last night in concert. He did If I Had a Rocket Launcher, but he also did this song called Orders, where he talks about, all kinds of people, good people, bad people, all these, different things. And he says, and our orders are to love them all. And it's like, okay, that says it right there for us. How do we do that in the middle of such a horrific war?
Yeah. So you have talked about the song "If I Had a Rocket Launcher," and I think there is, and I think I've read something in your Facebook page about the place of rage.
Yes.
In all of this, and what does it mean to have a sense of anger about injustice, but not demonize the person that's maybe causing the injustice? Yes.
So one of the things we did in terms of trauma is that what often happens is that when we're victimized, we bottle things up. Mm-hmm. And there's a Christian version of that in that we forgive people too quick. We preach that, you're feeling all this hurt and anger. What do? Forgive, and it's like, that's what my mom did to me, say, forgive your brother, it's kind of, all right, I forgive you, she makes you shake hands and you're gritting your teeth. And fortunately, as kids, you're more resilient, but for us and the traumas that we go through, one of the things that we see in a healing trauma is the importance of venting those feelings, letting them out. And I think of Rizpah, her sister-in-law or whatever disappeared. Rizpah went out into a public place where the slaughtered, and she stood there, and it's like she's saying, take a look at this. Don't look the other way. This is awful what happened. This is horrible injustice. And I think that's part of what we need to have, that rage to say, this is what happened. But the Bible says, be angry, but don't sin. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of us Christians, I should say, a lot of us Christians think being angry is being sinful. No, Jesus was angry, and he got angry when he saw what oppression was doing to people. So I think that you can't get to reconciliation. You can't get to healing. You can't get to transformation without acknowledging something horrible went on. And there's two ways that can happen. One is the expression of rage, but the other is lament. And I don't think we do much lament there's plenty in the Bible. We got a whole book called Lamentations. Mm-hmm. Which so fits what's going on right now, the city of Jerusalem being destroyed by the superpower. But right in the middle of that is the famous line that we have a great song that came from it. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Mm. But we want to do great is thy faithfulness, forgetting the lament, forgetting the pain, forgetting the rage, And I think that a part of it is to, how can we be angry but not sin? And a part of it is to remember the humanity of this person who's doing terrible things. How can we pray for our enemies? Gosh, that's the worst commandment Jesus ever gave to us, is to love your enemies. Pray for those who despitefully use you. And, it's like, that's a part of it. I had an experience with Fyodor, interestingly, in Bosnia. This was right after, actually 10 years after the Bosnian Civil War, but the divisions were still so deep and profound. And we had a group of people for a Bible study that Fyodor and this other missionary called together. We had ethnic Serbs, this was in Bosnia, but ethnic Serbs, mostly women, mostly Baptist, and Muslim Bosnian war veterans who were in a post-traumatic support group. So these are traumatized Muslims, and we're having Bible study together. I mean, I've never had as unique a group as that together. And so we got into the Rizpah story. And when we did the part about the Gibeonites being traumatized, this Bosnian Muslim army veteran said, "Now I understand the Serbs." He said, "They call me a Turk. I'm not a Turk." But it was the Turks who had invaded and brought Islam to that area and, butchered Serbs. And that happened centuries ago, but it was in the forefront of their cultural consciousness and awareness. So much so that was what they called Muslims, Turks, and he says, "Now I understand them." So this Bosnian Muslim army veteran who was traumatized by what the Serbs were doing, he says, "Now I understand the Serbs." And so with compassion, the compassion he was extending, it was stunning. And then this Bosnian Serb woman whose family had been devastated. She'd lost relatives in the war, and so she knew great loss too. She turns to the Bosnian Muslim army veteran, and she says, "May I pray for you?" And then she turned to me and said, "I'm not asking your permission. This is between him and me." And he said yes. And she did this beautiful prayer for the guy that had been the enemy, but who had also said, expressed this compassion of understanding to the one who had traumatized him. And it was like we had this moment of phenomenal peace. But this was 10 years after the war. And so sometimes, Fyodor and the other missionaries from Finland, they said they had never, ever, ever seen anything like that. But it was just like these two people just stepping out. Bosnia is very volatile right now. It's still, a very, very tough place. And sometimes it feels like we're just doing these little teeny tiny bits of maybe signposts of God's reign. I don't know. But
do you think that sometimes we don't always understand kind of the deep wounds that people carry? And I could just say that that's something that happens in, Ukraine or Serbia, but it also happens here in the States.
Absolutely.
And so how can we as Christians take those wounds seriously, things that have happened maybe a generation ago, but to understand they still have an effect now?
I think that some of the things that can be very, very helpful. One is finding ways to express our feelings and doing that in a context of worship. So Psalms of Lament can be a part of it, and kind of opening up those kinds of things. The African American community's been so traumatized from slavery, Jim Crow, structural racism, all yada, yada, yada. And Menachem talks about the way that gets in our bodies. And in many African American churches, there's a lot of body expression in worship. And I think that that's something that is actually has been a seizing hold of healing, in some really special ways, and I think that's that's a part of the answer. There may be other pieces that we can do to watch those things where we're trying to stifle it with some religious oughts. You should forgive, versus allowing the expression, but doing it in the presence of the Spirit of God. And so that's a piece. I think so. Sometimes even refining the stories that we tell in the Bible, naming things, I once, when I was a pastor, named childhood sexual abuse, and talk about stuff that then emerged. It's like people felt permission to say something that they'd never ever, they'd kept, buried for so long. And so I think, there's a lot of closets we need to come out of, but to come out of those closets in a context where there's grace, and to do that. Then there's hard work, how do we put it together? And one of the things that I think is very important that we sometimes talk about is memorializing. And there's, like in the I haven't seen it yet, I want to go, is there's a memorial for lynching. In
Montgomery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to see that too.
Yeah. And one of the things they do is they have things for every county in which a lynching took place.
Mm-hmm.
I know some lynchings happen in Michigan, and so what would it look like for us to find ways to bring that into our context, to memorialize? It gives us a chance to let the feelings get out, let the story be told, ritualize, to go back, to name names. In the Black Lives Matter movement, there's been a lot of the namings of the names over and over and over and over again. And that is so, so important. In Latin America, they did it with calling forth the person's name and saying presente.
Presente.
Yeah, they're here with us. And, when I was in Bosnia, Fyodor lived in the city of Tuzla, which is the only city where the Serbs, Croats, and Muslims didn't break apart. They kind of came together, and the memorials are together. You go to other parts of Bosnia, they got the graveyard for the Croatians here and the Serbs over here and the Muslims over there. They're all together in Tuzla, and they have names all together, of everybody that was killed, whether they were Muslim, Croat, or Serb. And, and I think that was very, very powerful, the importance of names. So I think that's a very healing thing that is already being done in the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the artistic expressions that are coming out, where again, names are so important. So I think these are really ways for that to happen. And then how can we then start moving together and talking together? I think writing history, that's one of the things that is kind of toward the end. How can we write the history in a way that we can all say, yes, that's what happened? We have that in the Rizpah story. We've got a document in the Holy Scriptures where everybody, even Rizpah, who's the hero, she comes out of the household that committed genocide, so, so it's like, it's complex. And, in our country, we don't even know how to call that war in 1861 to 1865. In the North, we call it the Civil War. In the South, they call it the war between the states. And that's because of all the ideology to protect those in the South, the whites in the South, from recognizing, from owning, not owning slaves, but owning what they did. And so instead we've got these, in fact, right now it's happening, textbooks, the battle of what's said, and, critical race theory and all that kind of nonsense that is, I think, a mask for racist agendas. And so, but learning how to tell the story so that everybody can say, yes, that's true. And that's a part of the healing of everybody, whites and blacks and Native Americans and folks from Asia. All of us can experience that healing together when there's truth. One little piece that we got from Psalm 85:10 is in Spanish out of Gustavo Perron's peace work. They use that verse all the time to open their mediation sessions between the insurgents and the government. And it says in Spanish, truth and mercy will come together. Justice and peace will embrace. And I think that some of us, no justice, no peace, and it's kind of like, well, that's true. That's true. Some of us are more justice. Some of us are more peace. Some of us are more truth. Some of us are more mercy. Let's forgive one another. Can't we all just get along? No, we got to have the truth. And it's like all of those are necessary for reconciliation. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the larger context of Psalm 85, it's like all that comes together for God's work. And so, those voices for truth, those voices for mercy, those voices for justice, those voices for peace, they all have to be there, and that's a long journey. So what's happening right now in Ukraine, that's going to come to an end at some point. It may come to an end in the next month. Putin thought it'd come to an end already. It could drag on for years, but the journey of peacemaking is going to be a generational one. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a generational one. But we also have our issues here, because it's like, in terms of slavery and racism, we're talking centuries, 500 years, and we still aren't there yet, and we still got a long way to go. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of pieces and been a lot of progress. I feel very excited about some of the things that have happened, and when I see the younger generation coming up, they give me a lot of hope. I'm glad to be the old guy passing the torch, but seeing some of the depth and wisdom that's been hard earned gives me some hope.
Well, wrapping this up, I have just kind of a question of how are you praying for the church in Ukraine, but also the church in Russia right now? Because both of those, I have to admit that I have to believe that Christians also in Russia are disturbed about this. And, you see the pictures of people being willing to protest at the risk of being jailed. Yes. How do you pray for those churches?
I think I pray for them to be. First, I pray for people to be safe. Mm-hmm. I pray for people to be able to discern how to be Jesus in their context, because there's a lot going on. I pray that they will have time and space to process it, and a lot of it's going to have to be put off for later. It's like you got to survive. But even in those moments, there can be ways, and I'm seeing some people take ways, like Fyodor, to be transformative. And it's like, okay, we're gonna feed people. That's what our task is going to be. And so I pray that people would find Jesus among them. Mm-hmm. Because where is Jesus? It was the old book. I think it was written in the 1800s called Quo Vadis. They ended up making a movie of it. But they have this scene that is from church tradition where Nero's persecution was breaking out. I'm going to get choked up here. And Peter's fleeing the city, and he meets Jesus going into the city, and Jesus asks him, Quo Vadis, which way are you going? Mm. And Peter turns around, and he goes back with Jesus, and is crucified. And Peter's crucified. And I think that, I'm not criticizing anybody who flees and becomes a refugee at all, because Jesus was a refugee. I think of that too, for those who are refugees, to know that Jesus was a refugee to Egypt, fleeing violence. And so praying for the refugees to know Jesus, but also for those whoever they are, to hear the voice of Jesus and to feel Jesus with them and following Jesus wherever they are, in Ukraine, in Russia. And what'll that look like? There's a part of us that, hey, the kingdoms of this world they're gonna do their thing, and it's gonna be awful, and sometimes so many innocent people are gonna pay horrific prices. But there's things that are being done now that are gonna be part of God's ultimate revelation, if you will. And so my prayer is that people would be tuned in enough to do that. And that if I can help them in any way, I think of Moses, and it's a war image. I hate the war image side of it, but when he's raising his arms in the battle against the Amalekites, he got tired, and Hur came on one side, and Aaron's on the other, held his arms up, and so I see, what can I do to hold up the arms of? I can't make the decisions. They've got to hear from God and do as best they can, but I can be there for them, and that's part of what I'm trying to do, is my response and prayer for myself in relation to my brothers and sisters.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast, and thank you for really this, in I think, a message of hope that is really needed right now, not just in Ukraine, not just in Russia, but even here in the United States. So thank you.
And thank you, Dennis, for the invitation, but also for all that you're doing, which is a part of that revolution of hope, if you will. God bless you.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dan. It was great to chat with him. I learned a lot, and I hope that you did too. And as I said at the beginning, that there will be other episodes relating to the war in Ukraine, so please stay tuned. As we end this episode, just a few things to remind you about. Make sure that you follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and YouTube. The links are in the show notes. Visit us at enroutepodcast.org, and you can find each episode to listen to, but also additional material. If you have a comment or question, feel free to drop me an email at reverendpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. I really am looking forward to hearing your questions and comments, so send those emails. And then finally, as I've kind of said before, consider leaving a rating or a review, 5-star rating or a review on your favorite podcast app, especially iTunes/Apple Podcasts. Those reviews make it a lot easier for other people to find this podcast. This is a podcast that others should know about, and I do hope that you can leave a review and also share this podcast with a friend. So that is it for this episode of En Route, the podcast that is at the intersection of church and Maine. I am Dennis Sanders, your host. Take care, Godspeed, and see you soon.